me, he's a process-driven coach, that he's got a process in place and the process has to work. If it doesn't work, you just get the impression from outside the four walls that he's not sure what needs to happen next for them to get the result. Or is that being a bit harsh? What about Nat Fyfe, Dash?
Yeah.
What do you do with him? Do you play him forward? Do you play him off the bench? If the body falls over early in the season, do you make a decision? We know he's a great player, but the body has let him down time after time, especially in recent years.
Yeah, I think they've got enough quality young mids that they can transition him forward. He's a good size. He's not a super kick for goal, but he's a smart player in the forward line and competitive and can bring other players into the game. And obviously they've got Amos and Treacy and these sorts of guys that are quite lively down there that, having his experience, I think would be a really important thing for them and might potentially help in those composed situations where they can miss a few shots at goal. I mean, they went 3-8 against the top 8 sides last year. Obviously, they did beat Sydney, but they showed some signs at times of being almost there. And I just think in terms of their leaders, obviously Pearce missed a bit of footy, Darcy missed a bit of footy, Fife's one of those guys as well. That if he can marshal the troops, perhaps in that forward line where they're quite young, maybe that could be something that would just help them in key moments.
And Damian, can they work successfully? There have been a few commentators that have said it can't work, and I suppose the jury's still out with both Darcy and Jackson in the same team, and Jackson predominantly playing forward.
I think it can, but it comes down to communication. We've seen sometimes that it doesn't work out, as we've seen at Melbourne, going back a couple of years when they had the Gordon-Grundy combination. But look, I think Jackson still has a fair bit to learn, even though he's been in the system for a few years now. I think it can work if you structure both of them properly. I think he needs to still build a little bit of bulk and maybe be a bit more of a presence up forward in terms of presenting as a target. But I think it can work. We've seen two-pronged attacks or twin-pronged attacks work if you structure them right and they have good communication, just that inherent chemistry.
Well, I've got them making the 8, and I think they need to make the 8 if Justin Lemieux to keep his job. Dash, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I think they're certainly capable, and I think even of upside of teams that didn't make the finals, they'd be right up there. You compare them with like an Adelaide Collingwood are probably expected to bounce a bit, but Gold Coast, those sorts of teams that are looking to have that influence. But yeah, Fremantle for a lot of the year looked a chance to finish top 4 in a pretty even season. So. I think there's still a danger that, they're a bit like Carlton in the sense that you feel like they're capable of a bit, but at the same time, it can go the other way. But yeah, I would think that bare minimum, they would expect to play finals with what they have.
Damo?
Yeah, I agree. I think they'll sneak into the finals and perhaps rebound to maybe 7-4-8 around that region.
Yes, I certainly think, as I said, they need to, and I think they can. This is our preview of the AFL season 2025, with my name being Dan Lonigan for Dashing Dan Sporting Adventures. We're here with Darren, Parkin and Damian Watson for KISS Professional Solutions. They're based in Carrum Downs in Melbourne. You can get them on 1300 KISS PS 547777, and they take pride in going the extra mile for their customers, aiming to retain them for life. Geelong, now the Cats, always find a way to play in the finals, always find a way to be competitive. They weren't far away from another grand final appearance last year. They've lost Tom Hawkins, but they didn't have him for most of the year, so I'm not sure that's going to be a big out. I mean, look, a big out holistically for the club because he's an outstanding player, an outstanding person. I still worry about their lack of a quality ruckman. They get Bailey Smith in. If he's fit, he'll give them the outside run they need. Look, they'll be thereabouts. They always are. But I always say this about Geelong guys. Where are the good young players coming through? But they don't tend to worry about that because they're always topping up, aren't they?
Exactly right. And they've been one of those great examples of a regenerating club, a bit like Sydney, although Sydney did have, those couple of years over the COVID period where they, I guess, somewhat bottomed out. Geelong have had the odd off year, but they just have this innate ability to regenerate pretty well without actually having to do a full-on rebuild, which I think is testament to the club. I think they have a pretty good culture. What I hear on the inside, it's probably one of the best in the AFL. Players are happy to take a little bit less to stay there, and that's permeated for the best part of the last, 17 or 18 years. So I think if they continue that formula, they're never necessarily going to bottom out. And there's still players who I think can develop. I mean, if you look at Max Holmes, for example, over the last couple of years, and how he's somewhat improved over time and I guess increased in his responsibility. I guess my worry is you mentioned Hawkins going out, whether they have enough or the same sort of goal scoring avenues, because he's been a pillar of experience for quite a while. So I know they have options there. You look at players like Shannon Neal over the time who've developed as well. So I think that'd be maybe the scoring aspect would be something that I'd focus on from a Geelong point of view.
Yes, the other aspect as well on that was the other end of the ground. So looking at some of the numbers, I mean, 2023 when they missed the finals, they had a percentage of 112.6. Last year it was 112.2. So very similar season. And last year they went from being ranked 7th to 11th defensively. So, and I guess the issue was they got opened up a little bit.
Yeah.
Only Carlton conceded more goals against top 8 sides than amongst the top 8 sides rather than Geelong did. And, they lost by 64, 63, 47 and 30 in that sort of back end of the year. St Kilda outscored them by 51 points in the second half. Brisbane outscored them by 39 points in the second half in the prelim. And after they won that first 7, they went 8-8, and that's 9-9 if you count the finals. So did they go back to being sort of that middle of the road team by the end of the year? I mean, obviously Dempsey was an enormous find for them, and young Lawson Humphreys obviously showed quite a bit in the back end of the year, but obviously they do rely on, that they bring in mature recruits that can keep them going, and Bailey Smith's another one of those. But yeah, I just wonder whether, and look, there are some things about it that are good, but when you factor in that no side's ever won a flag with a defence ranked outside the top 4, and theirs was ranked 11th, it obviously does make you worry a little bit when sides can get scored against heavily. I mean, it's tremendously admirable what they've done over the last 20 years, but yeah, I'd be less confident than I would be on a few of those other sides around the mark. Needless to say, though, that they are Geelong and they do find a way, and you sense they'll put themselves in the mix again just by virtue of their tremendous culture.
Do they rely, Damian and Darren, interested in getting both your views on this, on Tom Stewart holding up the defence too much? And we saw a couple of times where he was tagged and teams, as you say, Dash, were able to open the cats up quite comfortably, and they didn't look like a great side down back. If Tom Stewart is able to intercept like he does, he holds that defence together. Is it him or bust a bit?
Little bit, yeah. I think Damo, that he gets tagged a bit, which is obviously unusual for a player in that role. That they'll often sit defensive forwards on him, but yeah, I mean, the cornerstones of their great sides built on the defence that they had with, if you look at their absolute halcyon days with Scarlett and Taylor and Lonigan and, Mackie and Milburn and all of these sorts of guys. Obviously now it's a bit younger and you do change over time, but yeah, maybe they just don't quite have the same system, which is always going to happen. But I reckon a lot of that also stems from the fact that their midfield, I guess, whilst it's still highly competitive, it's obviously not as dominant. So therefore it puts that defence under a bit of pressure. And I think how well drilled they are and how disciplined they are has kept them as strong as they've been for the last little while.
And I think also, Dash and Dan, there's that element of conceding goals very, very quickly, a whole clump of them, and that probably costs them the game in the prelim as well. And I tend to agree in regards to their reliance on Stewart. But also, they do tend to falter when the momentum and the confidence is on the opposition side. You go back to that prelim against Brisbane, they look to be pretty comfortable. I think that halftime break, to a degree, I know Dangerfield kicked the first goal of the second half, but they led by 25 points. I think maybe they got a little bit not confident. They're not a complacent side necessarily because they have a lot of discipline. But when the confidence and the momentum was against them, I think they conceded 4 goals within the space of 6 minutes early in that third quarter. And all of a sudden, pretty much the game was level pegging. Same with late in the last quarter when Archie and Rayner got those 2 late goals. And that proved to be the difference right at the end. They've just got to work on ensuring that when the confidence is not and the momentum is not on their side, that they don't leak as quickly as they do.
Where does Jack Martin fit in if fit? And that is the problematic question, considering how injured he has been at Carlton, considering they have Manor, who'll be that tackling machine. He made a couple of blues in the prelim, but did okay in his first year in league footy. It's a great story, as we know, getting his opportunity in his mid-20s. Tyson Stingle, we know, is a class act. Brad Close, and Brian Myers, who is the setup king, basically the goal assist king, isn't he? I mean, can Martin find a spot in that team, and could they go smaller without Hawkins and just the one big tall in Cameron, who plays a very different type of tall forward role, doesn't he?
Did you say Lionel Messi or Brian Myers? Oh, sorry, that's right. I keep getting them mixed up.
Be careful, be careful.
I'm only joking. I think with Jack Martin, it's an interesting one because I think he has ability. I've seen him show glimpses of it at Carlton, but yeah, you do worry about his propensity to get injured, don't you? There's always that element of risk when you take on a player that has a capacity to get injured on a regular basis. We saw that with a number of key position players over the journey. I think maybe on his side is the sense that I think he's still got a little bit of time on his side to try and reinvigorate his career. I think there's always that risk, but there is that talent there. We've seen with Geelong that they persisted with Stengel, and I know it was for different reasons. It was more for disciplinary reasons, but a lot of people put the black mark through his name for his career, and look at how he's turned things around. I know there's an element of luck involved when it comes to injuries, but maybe the change of environment will be good for him. It is worth a try, I think.
It can be. I mean, Lincoln McCarthy when he went to Brisbane and a couple of others. But I mean, Jack Martin he'll be 30 in round one. In the last 4 years, he's still got a few, but the last 4 years he's played 39 games and missed 54. So obviously averaging less than 10 games a season over that time. So yeah, you start to worry. Obviously Geelong back themselves in with those guys. I mean, it doesn't always work. A lot of the times it does, but they haven't got, you look at Jack Stephen and a couple of others, it doesn't always work with the recycled players. But, if anyone's going to squeeze it out of them, it's probably them.
What are you guys expecting from Bailey Smith? I mean, he's the player the Bulldogs need and have lost him with that outside run, but you knew that was going to happen. He'd basically checked out as soon as he did his knee, and the Cats might be exactly what he needs, but he's an interesting cat, for want of a better expression. I mean, is Geelong going to be able to rein in that exuberance and that individuality that exists within his makeup?
Yeah, I think he's the type of player that that would thrive in that environment, and it would be a big asset for them. I think in their midfield, he's going to be a pretty significant factor, and the slightly off-Broadway nature of living down there might help him a little bit. So, I think it's a good fit for both of them, to be honest.
Off-Broadway nature, Dash. I think this is a bloke who loves the attention and the limelight. Not having a go at him by saying
attention
that,
and limelight can be dangerous. So I think it might be bad for him, but it might be good for Geelong. So.
He brings in the marketing dollars, Dash. That's part of the problem for clubs, is bringing in the revenue. So if he can get Cotton On and those types of brands along, well, I suppose it helps financially, which is a good investment.
Nod, wink, wink on the helping out financially thing, perhaps.
And the other thing too, just on the football field, everyone's been saying Geelong lack a bit of pace in the midfield, and he's one of those players, along with Holmes, that gives them that pace. What about in the ruck? Do we need to stop talking about the ruck, because they continue to keep presenting to be in contention for a premiership without a quality ruck? Reece Stanley's been a solid performer at best. Conway can't get the body right. Sam De Conning, the jury's still out as to whether he's a ruckman. And really, they haven't found anyone else to come in and do the job. I'd love to see Conway get a decent run at it, but it just depends on his body.
Yeah, they've tried in the past with, Segler and these sorts of guys that they might have, brought in as experienced players. But yeah, I mean, obviously they don't want to be using Blitzarves in that role because of his capacity in other aspects. De Koning likewise has shown prowess in a key position sense, and a little bit different to his brother in that space, who, ruck forward and that sort of influence. But yeah, as you say, they keep finding ways. I think they want midfield ruckman who can get the ball a little bit. Obviously, Reece Stanley can move around, and he's actually very quick and very mobile. And I think they look for that type of thing. And even in their premiership days, I mean, obviously Mumford was pretty solid, but Blake and West and these sorts of players, apart from Brad Ottens, it's been that way, I guess, for them for a little bit.
So where do we think they'll finish? I've got them definitely making the 8 again, because they just do generally, bar 2023, of course, when they obviously maybe lacked a bit of hunger, got off to a slow start and can never really get their season going. But I'd be surprised if they don't make it, and I'd be surprised if they're not in contention to win the flag. So I reckon they'll be hovering around top 4 once more.
I think they'll get everything out of themselves, but I've got them capable of playing finals, but not capable of winning the flag. And I know that sounds funny because they were 5 goals up in the second half of a prelim and then would have monstered Sydney in the granny. So that they clearly weren't far away. But I just get the feeling that maybe there's a few sides that I would have ahead of them. I look at the 9-9 run over the last 18 games. It's probably a little bit more indicative of them than the 7-0 start.
Yeah, I probably agree with that. It was a reasonable. You still got to beat teams, but it was a relatively easy start, wasn't it? When you consider what they had in the back end, and they did come back to the field. What do you reckon, Damo?
Probably around fourth or fifth. I'm in agreement with you guys. They'll be on the precipice to the top four, but I'm not sure if they'll win the flag. But you just can't. You can't keep doubting them because they've proven us wrong time and time again.
They sure have, and they love doing it. You're with the 3Ds, Darren, Dan, and Damian for our footy preview for Dashing Dan's Sporting Adventures, thanks to KISS Professional Solutions and their website, www.kissps.com.au. To the basket case now, and the Gold Coast Suns just have to make the finals this year. I know this is a big call. I reckon there'll be pressure on Damian Hardwick if they don't. He's had 2 years with the new toys if they don't make it, or the new and shiny toys, and they won't be so shiny anymore. And they've got the 2 halfback flankers to give them the run they probably needed in Noble and Rioli. Dash must make it, should make it, particularly if they can keep winning games at home, which they showed they were pretty good at last year.
Yeah, and that was their season in a nutshell. They were 9-3 at home and 2-9 away, and their only 2 away wins came in their last 2 away games. They beat Essendon after the siren in that famous game, and then they beat Richmond at the MCG, who by that stage were obviously the worst team in it. And were on their knees injury-wise as well. So clearly a disappointing record on the road. But at home, they beat Port Adelaide, Hawthorn, Geelong and Collingwood. And the Geelong win was by about 11 goals. Collingwood win full of merit. They beat Essendon at home as well, who were playing well at the time. Their midfield, they had 2,500 possessions between their top 4 midfielders, Flanders, Rowell, Anderson and Miller. They also got 36 goals out of those players, which can improve, but isn't too bad from a midfield group. Something like 500 tackles as well between those players. Flanders was one of the most improved players in the comp and second unluckiest player not to be in the All-Australian squad of 40. So they were, did a lot of things right, but just that record, losing to West Coast away, losing to North Melbourne away, those sorts of losses, which were really unacceptable for a side trying to play finals. But, in terms of their scoring, in terms of their midfield, their forward half pressure differentials, their inside 50 numbers, all of those things point to them making the 8 if they just tidy it up a little bit. So, bare minimum for them to play finals.
In your opinion, who was the most unluckiest player to miss out on the
Rowan Marshall? And I know that I probably have the biased hat on.
But, I agree with you.
He was stiff,
He's very, very stiff. Should have been in it and probably should have even been in the final team. Absolutely.
Yeah, but Flanders had something like 680 disposals and 150 tackles or something. He was desperately unlucky as well.
But Damian, just on that, often you need to have one good year and you have a breakout year like Flanders has had. And then if he does it again the next year, he's an automatic selection, isn't he? You see that time after time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, yeah, you're probably right. I think just on the Gold Coast themselves, you got Leo Lombard coming in, who shows a lot of dash. He's a very good run-with player, and he could create goal-scoring opportunities as well. But you're right, they need to improve overall because, they've got 10 top 10 picks on their list, and they've had a lot of concessions over their history. Jeb Walter's another one who's still got a little bit of development to go, but he has the signs of a very good key forward once he can get a bit of continuity and he gets used to the pace of the game. Rowell, I think he just needs to probably someone that needs to stop worrying about winning the contest, going in for the contested ball all the time. I know that's a silly thing to say, but he throws his body in all the time. But there are probably situations where in a confined space, he can get the ball on the outside. He just seems to lack a little bit of confidence. I think that he had confidence certainly in the early days, one of the better debutants of all time, as we know. But I just think he seems to have lost that confidence, but I think he can get it back. And Anderson is a very good player as well. So we want to see the fruits starting to come to fruition for the Gold Coast Suns. I just still have my doubts as to whether they can run out the rest of the season. It's been a bit of a common practice for them, hasn't it? You even go back to 2014 when it looked as if midway through the year with Ablett Jr. on fire before he did his injury that they were going to make the finals and they fell away. We've seen it the last couple of years as well. 2023 is another example where they looked like they were going to make the finals mid-season and fell away dramatically. So I think fitness has to become a factor as well that they really need to work on. Yeah, just whether they make the finals, I'm not sure. I still think the jury's out on them a little bit. And they might just miss out, but we want to see improvement. Do you guys think, I might throw this out to you guys, if you look at the history now of the Gold Coast Suns, what are they, 14 years in effectively? Everyone thought they were going to, them and GWS were going to win multiple premierships 5 years down the track after their initiation into the AFL. Would they be, the Gold Coast, the greatest failures of all time in regards to what they've been given and what they've actually put out there on the park?
Probably, and further to that, Damo, just to support what you just said. So they were 9-8 this year, went 2-4 in the last 6. Last year they were 7-7, and then went 2-7 after that. 2022 they were 7-6, and then went 3-6. 2021 they were 6-10 and went 1-5, and then 2020 they started off okay. They were 4-3, and then went 1-8-1 in the shortened season. So, yeah, the second halves of years have been very poor in the last 6 weeks or so. But yeah, I think, Dan, that's a reasonable assessment. Certainly in the history of the AFL, they've been an enormous disappointment based on what they had, even by comparison to Port Adelaide and Freo, probably different because they're football states. So. It's a little bit different, but compared to the Bears, even who made the finals Swans, but Bears who made the finals in their 9th season before they merged, mind you, and made a prelim before they merged. So, how do you assess it?
Well, I mean, they were given obviously all those early draft picks, and I don't think they chose as well as they could have in 2010. They missed out on a few. And then outside Ablett, I don't think they picked up the right experienced players, and that put them on the back foot. And then I think there was an attitude of, as long as we're competitive, that's okay. And I think that bred into the psyche mentally of the football club. We'll just be competitive for a while. We'll be competitive. We're not a football state. We're still developing. We're going to try and be the most successful sporting team on the Gold Coast. There hasn't been a successful sporting team on the Gold Coast. There still hasn't been a successful sporting team on the Gold Coast, whether it be A-League soccer, whether it be NBL basketball, whether it be the NRL. They've tried a few times, as we know. So at the end of the day, it's going to take time. The AFL knows it's going to take time. So I think they took that preservation attitude that it doesn't matter whether we have the success or not early days. We're here for the long haul. And I think it permeated into the club, and they were never able to sort of recover. I think 2013 was 2014 was the year where I thought that they make the finals. Ablett was on target to win back-to-back Brownlows. He's having as good a year in 2014 as he did in 2013, where he dominated the comp. And who knows? I mean, I think they probably make the finals in 2014, and we're having a different conversation, aren't we? And they might have been a much different side, but they were very reliant on him. Now they're not just reliant. Obviously, he's gone, but they've got a number of good players. The Coaches is obviously gone. Rankin's gone. They recovered okay without Rankin. I think they'll recover okay with the Coaches. He's a bit like Nick Cox at Essendon. He's a player without a position. We'll see if Port can find him one when we talk about them in the next couple of weeks on the program. But no, just in a long-winded answer, I just think their psyche mentally hasn't helped them at all. It's been a case of, we'll eventually be okay. Good, solid performances will do for the time being, and they haven't been able to get out of that malaise.
Yeah, it felt like, just on that, and no way of knowing without being inside either club, but it felt like when you compared them to the Giants who joined the following year, that the Gold Coast had always felt a little bit more, I don't know if experimental is the right word, but like a project that would take time. Whereas the Giants, even when they struggled to win games in their first couple of seasons, felt a bit like a football club. Like they felt like they were, I don't know, a bit more grassroots. They had a bit more of a hard edge to them. I don't know, like whether it was a little cultural thing, but that was always the perception I had, that maybe they had a little bit more immediate mongrel about them, sort of thing. It was, I don't know. Yeah.
It certainly helped that they had both well, two of the bigger mongrels, if you like, as coaches in Kevin Sheedy, for want of a better expression, Kevin Sheedy and Mark Choco Williams, looking after the team, GWS and the Gold Coast. As much as I love Bluey McKenna, I just don't think he's a great head coach. And he was appointed coach of the Gold Coast, which again probably tells you, okay, he's a first-time coach. We'll give them time. Sheeds is in there to maybe fast-track GWS, even though they knew they weren't going to win too often early day. But as soon as Cameron came in, they were probably ready. And I think that the early picks that they had in the first round that were given to them, I think they ended up being better players and they developed them better than what the Gold Coast did. So where do we think, boys? I think top 8, and I think they need to win a final. They've got enough talent this year. We mentioned Noble, Rioli will be great assets. Rioli and Harvey played very well together, or worked very well together. I think they've just got to make the finals and they need to win one. And if they get a home final first up, I think they can.
I agree with what both of you have said in a sense that, yes, I think that's their expectation on talent, that they should be able to do that. But I also share Damo's caution about, I guess, their track record late in seasons. And probably until it's done, it's hard to have faith that it happens until they actually do it. So, you know, if you were to sit here and say, I can picture the Gold Coast Suns playing finals and winning one, in theory, absolutely. But obviously Damo history does play a part. So probably until you see it, it's hard to tip it.
Yeah, I think they'll finish ninth, Dan.
Really? You think that?
Yeah, I think so. I think they'll get close, they'll improve, but I'm not sure if they'll make the finals.
Well, I think they'll really feel it if they don't this year, because I think it's about time. They should be ready to go.
Agree.
They're 15th year in the competition. This is Dashing Gan Sporting Adventures, and we are previewing the AFL season. This is part 2, and we're going in alphabetical order. Today we're looking at Fremantle. We think we'll make the finals. Geelong, we certainly think will make the finals. Gold Coast, Damo's got them 9th, a la Richmond back in the 90s. Parko and I think they'll make the finals. I think they have to win one to really frank their improvement under Damian Hardwick. And now we look at the team that we did discuss a bit last week, and we'll discuss them in greater detail now for KISS Professional Solutions. And that, of course, is GWS, who, as you said last week, Parko, probably should have won it, could have won it, dominating 2 finals, lost their way badly, still trying to work out how they lost that final to Brisbane. And Sydney had a good last quarter to get over the top of them, and I'm sure they're ruining the disappointment. Whether it can help them or whether it ruminates amongst them and doesn't help them, that's going to be the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, look, both losses cost them, and the Lions one's probably more noteworthy given how far ahead they were, but the Sydney one was probably more damaging in terms of what it did for them. Obviously, if they had won that game, they get a week off and a home prelim. They would have played Port Adelaide in that prelim, who weren't quite at the level and obviously struggled in that prelim. So you think they would have got through and made the grand final. They probably wouldn't have played Sydney, because you would have flipped Sydney into the other side of the draw and they might have got knocked out in either a semi or a prelim. Who knows? Who do they end up facing in a grand final then? Is it Geelong or somebody like that? I don't know. Yeah, that they certainly should have made the grand final and probably should have won it on the basis of the final series that they had. And look, they won their first 5 and then they won 7 in a row late in the year, but they lost 3 in a row twice, which included the last 3, and 2 of those, the awful finals, and they got beaten by the Doggies in Ballarat, I think, in the final round. So obviously similar to Carlton the year before, in that they came flying into the finals and then went flying into a prelim and then nearly won the prelim. And then this year, they pretty much had the same season statistically in terms of defence and attack and everything else, but you know, got going earlier and kept themselves, you know, top 4 bound for much of the year. But yeah, good enough, but a waste, really. I mean, if you look at this, probably their second best chance to have won a flag behind, we probably at least said 3 best chances of winning a flag as being 2016 when they lost the prelim by a kick, last year, or 2023 when they lost to Collingwood by a point, and this one. I know they played in a grand final, but that was probably a bit more against the flow than what these other 3 have been, and they got smashed in that game. So, yeah, I think they've had 3 chances to win a flag, 16, 23 and 24.
Well, the most talented team, I think, was 2016. That was a very talented side. I think we feel it is, being a Bulldog supporter, was one of the greatest days of my life, that prelim. Great to be up there and watching it. If Steve Johnson plays, I think he kicks a couple and they win the game, but he didn't. And the Dogs had some luck and won, but they're a very talented side then. Do you think, Damian, they've lost a bit of depth? Cumming hasn't been able to get fit. We'll see if he can get fit at Adelaide. We discussed that last week. Peatling had a good back end of the year, and he's now gone to Adelaide. They've picked up Stringer. It just adds to the potency of a forward line that has Hogan, has Riccardi, we know can play. Green can play. Daniel Bedford plays as that defensive forward. Daniel can also play on the ball as well. I mean, it's a very, very good forward line. Cadman, #1 draft pick, is still developing. I mean, that is an excellent forward line. But are you a little bit worried about the defence that it can leak a bit?
Look, they've still got some chinks in the armour in defence, but I have faith in them to try and improve that aspect. I mean, you got Sam Taylor, Jack Buckley's pretty solid in the contest. I really rate Finn Callaghan as a very, very good player who is one that's certainly got scope for improvement. Watching him, not long after he got drafted, showed signs of someone who just has that innate footy nous, and I think he is just an absolute star in the making. So he's another player I think can take a step forward this year. And you're right about that forward line. I mean, that's an embarrassment of riches, really. Stringer, Hogan, Green, Bedford, Daniel, Darcy Jones can provide a bit of pace and kick a goal. Aaron Cadman, who you mentioned, I remember watching him. The way he kicks the ball, I know you're right, he's got a lot of improvement to do in terms of his ability to lead out and to be strong in a one-on-one contest, but we talk about goal kicking as a skill that hasn't improved over time. Well, he's one that can just split the middle from 55 metres out, no worries. He is an unbelievably good kick of the football, very, very accurate, just has that good technique. So I think he's a player to watch as well once he does develop. I know they take time sometimes, these key forwards. I wouldn't be surprised if they win the flag. I think this is their year. They've got the finals experience under their belt now, this group. They'll learn the lessons. Maybe a bit of a parallel, not necessarily in terms of age, Dan and Dash, but maybe a parallel to what happened to Carlton in '94 when they went out in straight sets, where really they should have challenged for the flag and stuffed it up on a couple of occasions, and then they learnt those lessons and won in '95. I think GWS, this is their year.
Perryman is the other one that's gone too, but he just added depth, didn't he, Parker? You're a little bit worried at the top end with guys like Cornelio and Ward in the back end of their career that they've got enough young mids coming through. Obviously,
a little bit. I mean,
Tom Green's another one who's a star now.
Yeah, he is. I mean, they always find them. I mean, halfway through 2023, they were 3-9 or something, and then just unearthed a bit of talent and got their way through. Even Brisbane probably towards the end of last year. You knew you had Ashcroft there, but there was Neil and Dunkley and Zorko and these guys that you thought were, reaching that sort of point, but they were able to, have a lot of career best type footy. And then you get into where the Giants are at now. And I think it's, as Damo said, there's finals experience. The core of the group's got enough footy left in them. Yes, they're losing depth players, but they always have all through time. They just find more of them. And they just create ways to tidy up around the edges and do what they need to do. So, I think they're as good a chance as any in, as we say again, an even competition to try to avenge what has happened in the last 2 years. They probably should have won the prelim against Collingwood the year before as well. So, big chances for them to redeem themselves.
Guys, how do you think they'll best use Stringer, and how do you think he'll be able to function in that unbelievably talented forward line? Where he's not the #1 man, Damian. He's not the #1 man.
Yeah, it is a good question because he's not necessarily, due to concerns about his fitness, I don't know if he's a player that can be that runner up the ground. He probably is someone who's relatively confined to that radius 60 metres out and further into the goal face. You don't want him cutting off leads, but I think he does add that extra option up forward. It certainly gives them depth in the forward line if one of the players goes out injured. I think it really just comes down to how they structure up and how they work together, and that chemistry again in their planning in the pre-season to ensure that they all run to the right spots. But it is an interesting one as to how he fits in, whether he is that lead-up type of player similar to what Hogan presents.
Is he a good pickup, Dash?
Yeah, I think he's one of those guys. I know they've tried it with, Stevie J, who you mentioned earlier, and those sorts of players in the past. But yeah, I mean, he doesn't need to star for them. He just needs to, if he plays 18 games for the year but plays 2 good finals, kicks 3 in a prelim or something, that's really all they need him to do, is to have an impact when it matters a couple of times, and that might be the difference. He's good enough to win games if he doesn't play all year, but he's one of those guys that could maybe decide a tight final. Maybe they win both of those finals if he's on their list this year.
Does he like that though, Dan and Dash, being a role player as opposed to being, I guess, a package, as Brian Taylor calls him?
He never recovered from that
not.
either. He never recovered.
Yeah, the comparisons that were around at the time. Look, maybe not, but hopefully he's mature enough to understand what stage of his career he's at.
Correct.
And accepts that. So,
I mean, in 2016, he wasn't really a match winner. He kicked 4 in the semi-final.
Correct.
To get them back in the game, and then got in the third quarter, kicked 2 very important goals, as we know. Didn't have a great game in the prelim, but set up the last kick to Dixon and was involved in a couple of handball chains before that. Of course, in the grand final, kicked that unbelievable goal from the McRae hand pass, and then the last kick to Parkin to kick the winning goal. So he played his role in important matches when his relationship with Luke Beveridge and the club was starting to go south. He, of course, kicked that unbelievable goal to put it beyond doubt in Perth. The game's probably already over. So he showed his talent in that final series. So if he does that for GWS, 9 years later, he's going to play his role, guys, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And that's all he needs to do. I mean, yes, he'd love to kick 55, but, if he kicks 5 in 2 weeks in September, maybe that's enough.
Exactly. So where do we think, Damian, you think they can win it, do you?
Yeah, I think they could win the flag. They're my tip for the flag this year. I would trust that they would have the fire in the belly to atone for the last couple of years, particularly last year. It's always a good source of motivation, and I like their depth across most lines.
I've got them making it. I just have one question for both of you. I don't know whether they'll win it, but I've got them making it. I think there's one team that's probably going to go a little bit better. But I still think I'll be right in the mix. I'm a little bit worried about Adam Kingsley. Is he a bit old school at times? And can that feed off on the players, that when he gets fired up, I know they've tried to work on that right from day one, that the players go into their shell a bit and think, oh, we can't make a mistake, King, or we'll get angry at us?
Yeah, plenty of coaches have faced that challenge where they've either been too intense or not intense enough. And hopefully they're given enough time to adjust to that. I mean, Adam Kingsley, tactically, for anyone who's interviewed him, has been incredible. That is that man management side that you've got to work on, and composure and those sorts of things. People still talk about that with the likes of Brad Scott and even Simon Goodwin, even though he's won a flag and those sorts of things. But yeah, I think he's certainly got the people around him to hopefully nut that out. And I agree with Damo. I tipped them to win the flag last year, and there's no evidence on that to suggest they can't. So I'm going to double down and go again.
David Parkin once said, when he was interviewing Adam Kingsley re the GWS job or a couple of other jobs, that he learnt more about the game from Adam Kingsley. We know how much Parker loves the game and knows the game, and still a student of the game at the age of 82. And I worked with him for the ABC. He just loved working with the younger guys who just come out of the game, because he said he learned something every time. He said he learnt more about the game and the tactics of the game and how it's played from Adam Kingsley than any other person. That's a big rap, guys, isn't it?
Yeah, it is for someone like him who's been involved in the game as long as he's coached great coaches, he's played under great coaches. I mean, this is someone that was captain to John Kennedy's Hawthorn team, and he's captained some very, very good coaches in their own right, like Plough and these sorts of guys, Rodney Eade, etc. So yeah, he's been involved in some pretty important players and some pretty important people.
Certainly has. Righto, well, that's GWS. Now to the Hawks, and we're here for Dashing Dan's Sporting Adventures. We're previewing the AFL season, thanks to our major sponsor, KISS Professional Solutions. They're based in Carrum Downs. Whatever your office technology needs may be, they're here to provide sound advice, competitive pricing, and unparalleled customer support. John McEncrow and the team, 1300 KISS PS, that's 1300 547777, or www.kissps.com.au. The Hawthorn Football Club, the big improvers last year, were gone early in the season and then stormed home and just about beat everyone bar Port Adelaide in that controversial final. They've added to their list. They've got their 2 key defenders they needed in Josh Battle, much to Darren Parkin's chagrin. And also, they've picked up Tom Barash from the West Coast Eagles. So where does that leave Sam Frost? Where does that leave James Sicily? We'll unpack that in just a second. I wonder whether Sicily may go forward. They've got the best coach in the game tactically, in my humble opinion. And I'll put it out there and say that the Hawks will win the premiership this year. It might be a bit, but I think they can win the premiership. I think they'll keep improving, unless, of course, teams learn how to clamp down on them. But I think Sam Mitchell's a step ahead of everyone else. He'll come up with a way to ensure that he's still a step ahead of the rest. So I think the Hawks can win it. They were outstanding in the back end last year and could have, Darren and Damian, gone through undefeated from about, the Bulldogs match round 8 onwards. And there were a couple of very close matches that they lost. They were sensational, weren't they?
Unbelievable, weren't they? And very, very good for football, the old football. I think, what would they basically term the Gen Z side of the AFL?
Yes.
Do they bring the crowds in? I mean, what did they get? 90, was it 98,000 for that for that final against the Bulldogs in the first week, rather?
It was monster, yeah.
Incredible. I think it's good for football. We've been trying out, haven't we, just on this? We'll get to the tactical element in a moment, but I just don't understand sometimes, and we've worked in the media for a while, guys, we get stuck into certain players like Ginnivan, and he has done the wrong thing on certain occasions. I'm not denying that. But how long have we been crying out for characters that we used to have in the 1980s? Because players did become a little bit robotic because they were afraid of saying the wrong thing or expressing themselves in a way that they thought might be arrogant and could incite the opposition. It's an entertainment game, and those guys bring entertainment with the way they conduct themselves. So, I think the media are a bit hypocritical if they have a go at these sorts of players too hard when they've been crying out for a personality for years. But I love the way they play. I think the jury's out as to, I've got them third coming into 2025. I like their brand of football. It's just whether things go the other way, whether they get found out like they did off the back of the 2008 season in which they surprised people, similarly to, I guess, maybe not to the same level of success, but similarly to last year where they've come out of the box, whether they get found out tactically, whether they have a plan B for that. There's a lot of young players there that still need maturing. So that's why I've got them third. But love the way they play the game. And, you look at players like Weddle, like Ginnivan, who's not the most consistent player, but very exciting. And Cal Shadir, he's still got a lot of improvement ahead of him, but didn't he exceed expectations last year?
Well, he'll miss the start of the year. He'll miss the start of the year. Just on Ginnivan, I'm not a massive fan of Ginnivan, as you guys would know. A little bit old school with that. I mean, I wasn't madly in love with his comments last year where he said he can do what he wants to do under Sam Mitchell. That's not exactly right. He can do what he wants to do while things are going well. As soon as things start going poorly on the football field, any bad decisions he makes, such as going out the night before a final to a pub, and my brother and I had a robust discussion about that. He's a Hawthorn supporter, Tim. And he said, so what? You're always looking for an angle. I said, mate, why go to one of the biggest pubs in Melbourne, the All Nations? The football is on. And have a palmer with your mates, when if you really need to go out to a pub, go to a quiet pub or go to your mate's place and get them.
Doesn't matter though, Dan.
Pardon?
If he can handle the pressure of being recognised, and so what? As long as he's in bed by 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. or whatever it is, which he was, I don't really see an issue with it.
Again, I'm going to sit on the fence and say that it's kind of and that I agree with both of you in the sense that I think whatever works, if it works for you, it works for you. It's kind of that Jason Ackermanis principle where they gave him a pretty long leash at Brisbane, and he was a superstar and they were winning flags and it worked, obviously. But at the same time, the way football works, even if Jack Ginnivan's kicking 5 every week, if Hawthorn hit a flat spot and he was creating headlines for them, it would become a problem. Now, and that's where it's an issue. So I don't mind. Look, if he's fine, he handles it. He goes out with his mates. Maybe it helps him. Maybe if he sits at home, he thinks about the game too much and it bothers him, and he comes out the next day a bit flat or mentally fatigued. Maybe he needs that freshen up of I'll just talk to my mates and play darts or whatever, and then I don't think about it. I'm all good. But yeah, like if it's in the paper and there's photos on social media, it's more Hawthorn that would have an issue with it, I think, than anyone else. If a problem did arise in terms of their form. So you kind of agree with both of you with that. I don't personally have a problem with it. but he's just got to listen to the club. If the club asks him to pull his head in, then I guess it would be best he listens in that situation.
And Dash, what do they do with Frost and Sicily? Is there a spot for Frost with Battle and Barras? And do you play Sicily forward? He has shown at times last year when they needed him that he could go forward and win games. The Bulldogs game when they started their great run, and there are other matches late in the season as well. And he almost won the game against Port in the semi.
Yeah, whether they use him as a swing option. I mean, obviously Battle will intercept, and Barras likewise, Sicily likewise. So that's three really good intercept players that they've got in that role. Sicily can be very creative, can play a little bit smaller if he needs to as well. So he does give them that versatility to go forward. I mean, it might depend on Mitch Lewis's fitness and how much footy they get out of him, given the issues he's had over the way. But yeah, it is that factor for them, and you hit the nail on the head at the start that they could have conceivably gone through just about unbeaten. So they went 13-3 after their 1-6 start to the season. They lost to Port Adelaide by a point in one of the most miracle defeats you've ever seen in the middle of the year. They lost to the Giants by a kick when they were 28 points in front at three-quarter time in Canberra, yeah, and then Geelong got hold of them at Kardinia Park, and that Geelong game was the only time they conceded 100 points in the last 16 games of the season. They did it 13 times in their previous 30 matches, so it shows how much they improved, and they were unbelievable in the back end of the year. When you watch closely some of their efforts, when they thumped Adelaide at the Adelaide Oval, when they flogged Collingwood at the MCG, and then that final against the Bulldogs, they looked incredible with their pressure and intensity, and they were probably, I mean, if we look at Brisbane as the best team in the comp in the run home, and Hawthorn and the Giants, the other two that were right in the frame, Hawthorn were a top four side and possibly the best side in it for the last few months. They just came from so far back that they finished seventh, which obviously made the path to the flag so difficult for them. But yeah, they were absolutely one of the best sides in the comp by the end of the year, and they couldn't have looked more impressive in the run to the finals, and then in the final itself against the Bulldogs before they were a touch flat against Port.
Now, Damian, what makes Sam Mitchell a great coach?
Well, I think he's done a decent apprenticeship, Dan, which I think always helps. You make your mistakes early on rather than, we've seen people in the past come out of playing and the media, for instance, and not really have that apprenticeship. So I think he's learned his lessons from earlier on. I mean, he's come through the rank over the journey and experienced different environments as well. He was involved at West Coast. I think that probably did help him because you can get a little bit institutionalized when you're associated with one club. So I think those elements have probably helped him become a very good people manager because he probably had that. I don't know, from the outside, he looked a bit intense, didn't he? But he seems to get along with the younger players. They seem to play for him. So I think he understands the younger generation from a personal management, people management point of view. And I think he's still got scope for improvement tactically, but I like the positive brand of football that he's playing. And I think he did change a fair bit compared to those first 5 weeks of the year when they were very, very stagnant. They kept chipping the ball around and really had no system. So I think he had that adaptability to change things around a little bit when things weren't going all that well.
He's got an unbelievable footy brain, Dash, doesn't he? An unbelievable footy brain. We saw it as a player that often he was a step ahead of everyone. He wasn't quick by foot, but he was quick by hand and quick by mind, and obviously he's like that as a coach.
Yeah, he is, and as Damo said, that adaptability held his nerve under pressure. I mean, they set the scene a bit the year before when they beat Collingwood and Brisbane and teams like that. In that, towards the latter stages of the year, they beat the Dogs, who were in the mix of the finals, and the Saints as well, who played finals that year. So, I think, as you say, just natural football smarts. That's what made him a good player, negotiating traffic and picking the right options and natural leadership, and someone who players, for whatever reason, want to play for, whether it is that relationship. Michael Voss probably has that part of it as well. I know Sam Mitchell tactically, if there are criticisms of Michael Voss, sometimes it's on that other side of the coin, whereas I don't think Sam Mitchell has that criticism. So, he seems to have most of the boxes ticked.
So, Damian, you've got them third. I've got them being premiers again. It's only been a short 10 years since they last won one. They just started to win premierships, the Hawks. What do you think, Ash?
If you base it on where they were at the end, now I know they didn't finish top four, but they were a top four side by the end of the year. So I have no reason to knock them out of that at this point in time. So yeah, I certainly, and they probably improved their list, or definitely improved their list. So yeah, they'll go mighty close to winning the flag if they emulate what they did at the latter stages of the year. So genuine contender, and should finish top four.
Well, we've got a couple of weeks, but some homework for when we do the last four teams in a fortnight's time. We'll go through our top eight. Damian, you've got something to add?
Yeah, just wanted to say, since we last recorded, I know we talked about Troy Selwood last week. Adam Hunter,
Yes.
guys, passed away the day after, and it was just very tragic. Obviously, in his early 40s, you feel for his family. As a player, I mean, was he one of the best swingmen of all time? When you consider he did it in the biggest of big occasions, he always did it in a final or in a big game or the grand final. People forget. I mean, everyone will remember he kicked the decisive goal in the '06 grand final. A lot of that was due to Daniel Chick's smother and also Shepherd, but he still swung forward and kicked the goal. And then in '05, had they got over the line in that '05 grand final, people forget he kicked a goal from right on the boundary late in the third quarter, which was probably the best goal of that grand final, and then kicked another one under pressure to put them 10 points up with 11 minutes to go, hard up against the line as well, deep in the pocket. So very, very sad news, but one of the better swingmen we've seen in modern football.
And one of the other pressure moments, in a game that doesn't get discussed probably as much as it should, was his efforts in the second half of the prelim in '06
Correct.
against the Crows,
4
where
goals.
they were 22 points down at half time, and he was a huge factor in them winning that game. He kicked 3 in the second half, kicked one just before half time that kind of kept them in the game, and then kicked the first of the third quarter, kicked another one in the third, and then he kicked the goal that got them within a point in the last. So, yeah, I think echoing those sentiments, a tragic scenario, a tragic week for footy that was.
West Coast are obviously very sad about it, and we wish the Hunter family all the best. It was rather ironic. One of the last things he did down at his beloved South Bunbury Football Club, he was having a kick the night that he passed away. So he obviously still having a kick at the footy despite being in his mid-40s. He must have still been fit enough to have a kick at the footy. So that was probably important for him. But yes, very, very sad for the football community over the last week or so, Damian.
You called him, Dan. You were at those grand finals. So what are
I
your
called that
memories of
goal.
him?
I called the goal, Damo, when in 2006, the ABC did 2 separate calls. Wally Foreman was able to organise one back to Perth, and I called with him, John Dorotich, and the late Ken Judge, of course, Wally being also no longer with us. And the rest of them, Drew and Gerard and Mark McClure and Stan, called the grand final for the rest of Australia. And I happened to call the Daniel Chick smother, the Stephen Armstrong goal before that, and the Daniel Chick smother, and then Hunter running into an open goal, which got them over the line. But if it had gone for another minute or so, I reckon Sydney were coming. They were poor in the first half, Sydney, in that grand final. It was just on the TV on Fox Footy the other day. They were terrible. I remember Ken Judd saying they kept turning the footy over, but they found a way in the second half. And those matches, and I know Dash, you would have been disappointed in 2005 when St Kilda had a big chance of playing the granny, and ironically, Adam Schneider, who went to St Kilda's, kicked 3 goals in that last quarter for the Swans. But it was wonderful to have West Coast and Sydney involved in all those close finals and close matches. You just never knew which way it was going to go. Tough, hard, uncompromising football. And Adam Hunter played such a big part in that, being a bit of an unsung hero with his ability to go forward and go back. Do you think he was a better forward, Damian, or a better defender? I mean, you were very young, but you seem to know everything about the game.
I think history says he was more consistent as a defender, but gee, when John Worsfold needed a player to go up forward, he delivered at the big moments. He only kicked about 70 odd goals, I think, in his career. That's sort of the ironic thing. But how many times I mentioned the '05 grand final, he kicked a couple. '06 prelim, as you mentioned, Dash. '06 grand final. The '05 qualifying final, he took a screamer and kicked the goal with 5 minutes to go to put him in front, and they won that game. And I can remember as a 7-year-old being very upset when he kicked the goal against Carlton when Carlton couldn't win a game, even even if the world wanted them to. He kicked the goal to level the scores mid-year year in 02 as a youngster from outside 50, pressure on, and Mark Miranda ended up kicking a point to win them the game just after that. But he always sort of stood up at the crucial moments that often.
And just before I let you go, I don't know whether you've seen it, fellas, but it's a subjective exercise, the best of anything. They've named the best 25 marks, 25 goals of this century so far. You happy with what they've put up? There's some outstanding marks, and obviously they've got Buddy's second goal as the goal of the century so far. I thought both could have been 1 and 2. I mean, Eddie Betts has got 4 in them, or four of them in the top 25. So that one from the wrong pocket was special as well. And some of the marks, I mean, I thought Ashley Sampies, I happened to also call that particular mark that day against Melbourne at the MCG when we were broadcasting on the other side of the ground, and they were working on the MCC members at the time as part of the massive refurbishment in the early 2000s. And gee, I thought he got up higher than the actual roof at the Great Southern Centre. So high he got up. I think that's the best mark I've ever seen, but it didn't get in as number 1. Must have been.
Gary Moorcroft for me.
Gary Moorcroft was number 1, but I still reckon Sampi should have been number 1. But again, it's
where did they put the courageous back with the flight marks? Jonathan Brown against Hawthorn, Nick Rewald against
number
Sydney.
4. Number 4 for Jonathan Brown. I don't think did Revolt make the top 10? This is in the Herald Sun, by the way.
Yeah.
I'll have a look. But yeah, they were.
I reckon they were right up there too. I mean, okay, Sampi 1 for me, Moorcroft number 2. It was an outstanding mark for Moorcroft. Don't worry about that. There may be Brown and Revolt for their difficulty and how much they showed.
What about Andrew Walker, who took?
Andrew Walker was outside the top 10. He was outside the top 10. He's about halfway.
That's one of the best marks I've ever seen. Yeah. Incredible.
But
didn't even win Mark of the Year, which is extraordinary. Yeah.
They gave Michael Newton number 6, which actually, in fairness, was a very good mark. I reckon they've got recency bias. Isaac Heaney's one was pretty good, but maybe there's a element of recency bias. They've got Leo Barry as number 3, which, look, for the occasion, great mark. But if you look at the mark and look at it objectively, I don't think it's in the top 10.
Yeah, they put occasion on that.
I think there were 5 free kicks. There were 5 free
Yeah.
kicks. I think most of them might have gone West Coast way.
Yeah.
But anyway, they couldn't possibly call it. They couldn't possibly call it, and Sydney thoroughly deserved to win the game.
They did, yeah.
The 3 of us could talk historically forever. We're here to talk about the future. Thank you, guys. Darren, Parkin, Damian Watson with me. Dan Lonigan on Dashing Dan's Sporting Adventures. And we've just looked at the next 5 clubs, how we think they'll go. Fremantle, Geelong, Gold Coast, GWS and Hawthorn next week. Should be interesting. Melbourne, Simon Goodman's pretty confident. I'm not so sure. North Melbourne, I think they'll improve. Port Adelaide, great home and away side, but do struggle a bit in the finals. And Richmond, well, I think they'll still battle a bit, but they'll have a very, very young team and a bit of pressure on Adam Uzo. But we look forward to that. And, of course, we'll do it again for KISS Professional Solutions. You can get them on 1300 KISS PS 547777. Or their website is www.kissps.com.au. John McEncrow and the team. They're the largest independent provider of copiers and printers in Victoria. We're the largest small business in Melbourne, Sydney, Gippsland, Shepparton and Albury. And their office in Albury caters for businesses in Wagga. They offer business phone systems, NBN services, CCTV and security systems. And their main office in Melbourne is in Carrum Downs in South East Melbourne. Thank you, gentlemen. We look forward to your company again next week, and you can get all of my podcasts on Spotify and all the relevant social media outlets. Have a great week. We'll catch up next week.